I remember the first time I climbed into the cockpit of the P-47 Thunderbolt. It felt like strapping into a tank that could fly. The thing was a beast, bulky and almost unwieldy on the ground. But once you throttled that Pratt & Whitney engine, she came alive like nothing I'd ever flown. I had heard the jokes from some of the other pilots. You're taking that lumbering monster into the air. The Germans will laugh themselves silly. They said it wasn't fast enough to dogfight, that it couldn't turn like a Spitfire or a Bf-109. I didn't care. I trusted her 8.50 caliber Browning machine guns more than I trusted anyone's opinion. Our squadron was flying over northern France one crisp autumn morning in '44. The air smelled of cold and fuel, the clouds thin and slicing. We had been escorting a formation of bombers, the B-17s lumbering along below us like giant silver whales. I was on the left wing, scanning the sky, when I saw them, a flight of Focke-Wulfs climbing toward us, their Messerschmitt 109s cutting across the sun. The German pilots didn't even seem concerned about us. I swear, I could see them smirking through their canopies. I tightened my grip on the control stick. My heart pounded not with fear, but with a kind of electric anticipation. The P-47 didn't need to dance around them in tight turns. She had something else, sheer firepower. I lined up on the first 109, checked my gun's harmonization, and squeezed the trigger. The sound was deafening, the vibration rattling every bone in my body. Lead tore through the sky, and the Messerschmitt shuddered like it had been hit by lightning. It went down in a plume of smoke, and for the first time, I saw the real fear on a German pilot's face. They weren't laughing anymore. By the time the fight was over, I had seen more than a few of our 8.50 calibers rip through enemy fighters. The P-47 may have looked like a lumbering giant, but in the sky, she was a predator, and I was learning how to make her roar. Sitting there afterward, watching the remaining German planes retreat, I realized something. The laughs of our enemies didn't matter. What mattered was that when the time came, the Thunderbolt spoke in a language they understood. Pure, unstoppable lead. The sky was a mess of tracers and smoke now, like some kind of hellish fireworks show. I banked hard to follow a Messerschmitt that had tried to sneak behind one of our bombers, and I could feel every pound of the Thunderbolt pressing against me. She wasn't agile like a Spitfire, no, but she was strong, steady, and brutal. I flicked the throttle, and the radial engine roared, carrying me like a freight train toward my target. I could see him weaving desperately, trying to throw off my aim, but the 8.50 cals didn't care about his little evasive maneuvers. I lined up, lead calculated instinctively from hours in the air, and let the gun speak. The first burst tore through his left wing, chunks of metal and flames trailing behind him. He spiraled down, and I saw him bail out, canopy swinging open, parachute blooming like a ghost in the sky. I checked my 6 and saw another 109 trying to come in behind me. Normally, I might have panicked, but by now I trusted the Thunderbolt implicitly. I rolled into a shallow dive, let gravity help me pick up speed, and climbed hard over him. The bomber formations below were still moving like lumbering giants, oblivious to the scraps happening above. Another squeeze of the trigger, and the second German fighter disappeared into a cloud of smoke. After a few minutes, it was quiet to quiet. I could hear only the whine of the engine and my own ragged breathing. I counted 3 of theirs down, none of ours lost. It was surreal. Those pilots who had mocked the P-47, who had laughed at her clumsy appearance, they had no idea what she could do when pushed. She was a beast with claws, and I was learning to sharpen them. The adrenaline didn't fade until we were back over friendly territory. My hands ached from the stick, my ears still rang from the gunfire. But there was a grim satisfaction. Every time someone underestimated the Thunderbolt, it gave me a little edge, a little pleasure in showing just what a machine like this could do, when a pilot respected her strengths. And today, those 8.50 South had done more talking than anyone ever could. The next morning, the sky over the Ardennes was gray and heavy, like a warning. We were briefed on a reconnaissance mission, but intelligence reported Luftwaffe activity near a rail yard. That meant trouble, and I had learned by now that trouble usually meant someone would try to test the Thunderbolt. We took off in formation, engines growling, wings slicing through low clouds. I could feel the frost on the canopy edges, my breath fogging the inside glass. But I didn't notice much else. My eyes were glued to the horizon, scanning for movement, for the glint of an enemy aircraft. Then, almost without warning, a dozen FW-190s came screaming out of the clouds, diving on the bombers below. For a split second, I understood what the other pilots meant when they said the P-47 couldn't dogfight. Those Focke-Wulfs were fast, precise, almost predatory. But that split second passed, because then I remembered something vital. I wasn't trying to outturn them. I had 50 cals, tons of firepower, and a plane that could take hits and keep flying. I dove in, screaming through the air, and opened fire on the closest FW-190. The tracers cut a perfect line, and the first burst caught him in the engine and cockpit. Smoke erupted, and he fell away from the formation, leaving chaos in his wake. Another came for me, banking aggressively, but I climbed and rolled, timing my fire just right. Both of them ended up trailing smoke, one spinning down toward the forest below. By the time we regrouped, the bombers were safe, and most of the Luftwaffe planes had retreated. Limping back toward Germany, I was shaking not from fear, but from the intensity of the fight. The Thunderbolt had taken hits, but she held firm. I kept thinking about the laughter I'd heard months earlier from those who doubted her. Now, those same laughs had been replaced by silence. I landed back at base, exhausted, the controls sticky with oil and dirt, my uniform smelling of burned fuel and gunpowder. The ground crew started inspecting the P-47, noting the bullet holes and dents. I patted her nose like a loyal dog. She had carried me through hell again, and I knew, deep down, that anyone who underestimated her would pay the price if they ever crossed her path in the sky. The days blurred together after that mission. Flying the P-47 was no longer just a job, it had become a kind of conversation between me and the machine. Every climb, every dive, every squeeze of the trigger taught me something new about her, about myself. The Thunderbolt wasn't graceful. She wasn't sleek. She was honest. She told you exactly what she could do, and if you respected her, she would protect you. We were briefed for another escort run, this time over the industrial heart of Germany. Intelligence said heavy fighter patrols were expected. My stomach twisted not from fear, but from anticipation. I could feel that tension that always built just before the first contact, like the calm before a storm. As we reached cruising altitude, the sunlight reflected off the silver fuselages of our bombers, and I thought about the irony. These lumbering machines, so slow on the ground, were the true workhorses of the war, and my P-47 was their guardian. Then I saw them, a flight of Mi-109s diving toward us from high above. They were fast, and their pilots were confident. Some of them still carried that smirk I remembered from the first time I saw the enemy. But this time, I didn't hesitate. I pushed the throttle forward, and the Thunderbolt responded like a living thing. I dove in, guns blazing, and watched as my rounds tore through the lead fighter's wings. Pieces of metal peeled away, and the plane tumbled downward. The other Messerschmitts broke formation, scattering in every direction. The fight was brutal, brief, and merciless. I could hear over the radio that other Thunderbolts were claiming kills, but the Luftwaffe pilots were relentless. One of them latched onto my 6, firing a burst that rattled my canopy and sprayed the nose with bullet holes. I rolled hard, feeling the wind and the weight of the plane resisting my maneuver. Another squeeze of the trigger, and he was gone, spiraling down in smoke. Afterwards, when the dust cleared and the bombers were safe, I realized how much the P-47 had changed my perspective. Those who laughed at her had been wrong, catastrophically wrong. She was more than a plane, she was a statement. She taught any pilot willing to listen that power, firepower, and resilience could make up for a lack of elegance in the air. And in that lesson, I had survived, and the enemy had learned, sometimes too late, just what she could do. It was one of those mornings where the fog clung to the airfields and the engines felt heavier than usual. Intelligence had spotted a formation of German bombers escorted by fighters heading toward our lines. The higher-ups said it was crucial that we intercept them before they reached the French countryside. I climbed into my P-47, running through the pre-flight checks with almost religious precision. Every gauge, every lever, every switch mattered. The Thunderbolt demanded respect, and she rewarded discipline. As we ascended to meet them, the first enemy fighters appeared over the horizon like dark shadows, sliding out of the clouds. There were at least 20 of them, Mi-109s and FW-190s working together in a coordinated assault. My stomach tightened not with fear, but with focus. I had been in dogfights before, but this was a storm of metal and fire unlike anything I had experienced. I targeted the nearest Focke-Wulf and let my 50 cals tear into him. The first burst hit clean, shredding the tail section. He spiraled downward, smoke trailing behind him. Then, another fighter came at me from my blind spot. I felt the impact of a grazing bullet across my wing, a jolt that shook me, but the Thunderbolt shrugged it off. I rolled hard, feeling the engine strain as I positioned myself behind him. Another burst, and he went down. The air around me was chaos tracers crisscrossing, bombers shaking under near misses. the sound of distant explosions vibrating through the sky. At one point, AFW-190 dove on me so fast I barely had time to react. I pushed the Thunderbolt into a steep climb, my arms screaming from the strain, and let gravity pull me into a counterattack. My rounds ripped through his engine, and he nosedived into a field below. I checked my 6 and saw more enemy fighters retreating, realizing perhaps for the first time that the P-47 was not to be underestimated. After the fight, I looked at my plane. Bullet holes pocked the fuselage, the oil cooler had a few dents, and the canopy had scratches from debris. Yet she was intact, ready for the next mission. The Germans had underestimated her again, and every time they did, it reminded me why I trusted the Thunderbolt above all else. It wasn't just a plane, it was a fortress with wings, and I was lucky enough to call her mine. That mission started like any other, but it quickly turned into one I would never forget. We were tasked with strafing a German supply train deep behind enemy lines. Clouds hung low and heavy, slicing visibility to almost nothing. I remember thinking as I climbed into my cockpit, this isn't about dogfighting today. This is about precision, timing, and surviving the unexpected. As we approached the target, flak erupted from the ground like angry fireworks. The bursts were closer than usual, high explosive shells shaking the air. Chunks of metal raining past us. One round tore past my canopy, and a fragment nicked the left wing. I felt the shock ripple through the Thunderbolt, but she didn't falter. My heart pounded, adrenaline surging, as I dove through the flak, lining up on the train below. Suddenly, a group of Me-109s appeared from the clouds, taking advantage of the poor visibility. One of them came screaming at me from my 6, bullets cracking the armor around my cockpit. The Thunderbolt shuddered under the hit, and my first thought was disbelief. She's still flying. But flying she was, stubborn and relentless. I rolled into a steep climb, narrowly avoiding his next burst, and turned the tables. My gun spat fire, hitting him square in the fuselage. He spiraled down, smoke trailing as he disappeared into the mist. The supply train was in sight now, and I strafed it, my rounds tearing through the wagons, engines, and ammunition crates. Explosions lit the ground below, shaking the Thunderbolt and forcing me to hold the stick tight against the recoil. The sky around me was chaos tracers, smoke, and falling debris, but the P-47 held firm. By the time we turned back toward friendly lines, my plane was riddled with bullet holes, one engine cylinder overheating, and my nerves stretched thin. When I finally landed, hands trembling and soaked in sweat, the ground crew stared at the damage in disbelief. She shouldn't have made it back, one muttered. I smiled grimly and ran a hand along her scratched and battered fuselage. That day, I learned something crucial. The P-47 wasn't just powerful, she was stubborn, fearless, almost alive in the way she survived. And as long as I trusted her, we could take on anything the Luftwaffe threw at us. Some days, victory feels hollow. I learned that the hard way. We were on an escort mission over a vital munitions depot in Germany when the Luftwaffe launched a surprise attack. Our formation broke apart almost immediately, planes twisting through the clouds like fish in a storm. I could hear the radio crackle with frantic calls, and then silence as one of our own didn't respond. I saw Lieutenant Harris diving toward a group of FW-190s, guns blazing. He was fearless, one of the best pilots in the squadron and my friend. I followed from a distance, thinking I could support him, when a burst from an enemy fighter ripped through his engine. Smoke poured from his nose, and I watched helplessly as he went down. I couldn't help him. I could only scream over the radio, and even that got lost in the chaos. I felt cold anger then, a resolve that sharpened with every heartbeat. The Thunderbolt responded to my grip like a living thing, her radial engine roaring as I took aim at the Focke-Wulfs surrounding Harris attackers. My gun spoke in a language the enemy would understand, tearing through fuselages, sending planes into spirals of fire. One by one, they began to break off, perhaps realizing too late that they had underestimated the P-47 and us. Even as the enemy retreated, I couldn't shake the sight of Harris' plane trailing smoke, plummeting toward the earth. It was a reminder that even the strongest machine, even the bravest pilot, couldn't escape every danger. I landed that day with my hands shaking, my chest tight, and my mind replaying the fight endlessly. The Thunderbolt had kept me alive, but the price of the sky was stark and real. That night, I sat by my plane, tracing my fingers over the bullet scars and dents. I whispered a quiet thanks to her, and a silent apology to the friends we had lost. Flying the P-47 was more than skill or luck, it was survival, courage, and a constant reminder that the sky was unforgiving. The day of the big raid came like a thunderclap. Intelligence had confirmed a massive concentration of enemy forces near the Ruhr Valley. Hundreds of bombers, hundreds of fighters. The Luftwaffe was determined to stop us, and we were determined to get through. I climbed into my P-47 that morning with a mixture of dread and exhilaration. She felt heavy, powerful, ready for anything. I trusted her more than anything else in the world. We reached altitude over the industrial complexes, and the sky erupted. Me-109s and FW-190s dove from all directions, their guns cutting through the air like knives. I found myself in the middle of a storm, tracer fire everywhere. Explosions on the ground reflecting off the clouds above. The Thunderbolts 850 cals became my voice. Each squeeze of the trigger a sentence in a conversation I hoped the enemy never fully understood. I focused on a formation of fighters attempting to break through to the bombers below. One by one, I picked them off. Each hit a spray of smoke and metal. The P-47's toughness amazed me. She took hits that would have sent other planes into spins, and yet she responded instantly to my every command. The Germans hadn't laughed at the Thunderbolt in a long time. They were scrambling, evasive, and scared. By the time we cleared the engagement, dozens of enemy aircraft lay smoking across the horizon. The bombers we escorted intact. I looked at my plane, scorched, dented, but unwavering, and felt an overwhelming respect for her. The Thunderbolt wasn't just a fighter, she was a fortress in the sky. That day, in the largest battle I had yet experienced, she proved that sheer firepower, combined with a pilot who understood her strengths, could dominate even the most desperate enemy. Landing that evening, I was exhausted, exhilarated, and somber all at once. The sky had demanded everything, and the Thunderbolt had delivered. I had seen firsthand how power, precision, and determination could change the outcome of a fight, and how those who underestimated the P-47 paid the price. By now, the missions were taking their toll. Flying the P-47 day after day, facing flak, fighters, and the constant threat of death, left a mark that no amount of victory could erase. My body ached from the strain of controlling her in tight maneuvers. My hands blistered from the stick, and my eyes burned from scanning the sky for threats I couldn't always see. Yet, every time I climbed into that cockpit, I felt a strange reassurance. She was always there, solid, dependable, relentless. One afternoon, we were tasked with another escort mission over a heavily defended target near the Ruhr. I was tired, my mind replaying the losses of comrades from earlier missions. The images of planes falling from the sky burned into my memory. And yet, the moment the engines roared to life, that fatigue melted away. The Thunderbolt demanded focus, and focus was the only thing that mattered. As we approached the target, enemy fighters emerged from the clouds, and I felt the familiar surge of adrenaline. My muscles remembered every evasive maneuver, every burst of fire. I positioned myself behind a Messerschmitt, my guns roaring. Smoke and sparks erupted, and I watched as he spiraled down, disappearing into the patchwork of fields below. Round me, the sky was chaos, but I felt a strange calm. I trusted the Thunderbolt completely, more than my own instincts sometimes. She was my shield, my weapon, and my constant companion. By the end of that day, I was drained, physically and mentally, but alive. My plane was battered, my nerves frayed, yet we had made it through. I realized that flying the P-47 wasn't just about shooting down enemy planes, it was about endurance, about perseverance, about surviving when everything in you was screaming to quit. And through it all, that lumbering, seemingly clumsy Thunderbolt had carried me, always faithful, always powerful. She had earned every ounce of respect I had, and I knew I would never underestimate her again or let anyone else. It was near the end of the campaign when I realized what the P-47 had truly taught me. Flying over the shattered landscapes of Germany, seeing cities scarred, factories burned, and fields turned into battlefields, I understood that the war had tested not just skill, but endurance, courage, and trust. And above all, it had tested the bond between a pilot and his machine. The Thunderbolt had been more than a plane to me. She was a fortress in the sky, a relentless ally, a shield against death itself. I had flown her through flak so thick it felt like the clouds themselves were trying to rip me apart. I had fought enemy pilots who laughed at her bulk, and I had watched them learn, too late, what 850 caliber guns could do when wielded by someone who knew her strengths. I had lost friends, seen men fall, felt the heat of battle sear into memory, but through it all, she had carried me, battered but unbroken. On the final mission, I flew before returning home. I climbed above the clouds and looked out at the endless expanse of blue. The engines hummed like a loyal companion, steady and reassuring. I ran my hand along the throttle, thinking of every battle, every burst of gunfire, every enemy fighter that had underestimated us. And I smiled, quietly, with a mixture of relief and gratitude. The P-47 had done what no one expected, and she had done it with steadfast determination. As I landed for the last time, I felt a strange mixture of sadness and pride. War was over for me, but the lessons would stay forever. Power, courage, and resilience often outweighed elegance or speed. And sometimes, the things that others laughed at, the lumbering, ungainly Thunderbolt, could become the most fearsome force in the sky. I shut down the engines and climbed out of the cockpit, feeling the scars of battle on both my plane and myself, knowing that I had flown with the best, and that the P-47 Thunderbolt would always be legendary in her own right.